Now the next is sexual reproduction in plants. To reproduce sexually, plants have male and female reproductive organs in their flowers. The male part is called stamen and the female part is called carpel. Now, if the sexual reproduction has to take place, it takes place with the help of two reproductive cells called gametes. These are called the reproductive organs. Now, the parts of the flower, the four parts of the flowers are sepals, petals, carpel, and stamen. Now, the sepals are the green leaves which protect the flower when it is a bud. Petals, they attract insect to the flower, and these insects then help in pollination. Now, what are the different stages, these different stages in the sexual reproduction that we will learn about? Now, we will learn about pollination, fertilization and seed formation, seed dispersal, and germination. About these, we will learn in detail in this type. This is called sexual reproduction. Now, this is the structure of the flower. You can label it and you can learn about the different parts of the flower: sepals, petals, and the reproductive, that is a stamen, and then in the middle there is a pistil. And the stamen consists of two parts, that is long stalk called the filament, and the swollen structure is called that is called anther. Now, anther produces a powdery substance and which consists of very minute pollen grains, and pollen grains are the male gametes, and pollen grains have tough protective coat. This coat prevents them from drying up, and they are also very light and can be carried easily by wind or water. Next is the pistil. Pistil consists of ovary. This is Pistil consists of ovary, style, and stigma. Ovary is the swollen portion, and it continues into a long style which ends in the knob-like part called the stigma. The ovary contains one or more ovules. The female gamete, also called the egg, is formed inside the ovule. These are the two structures, that is the stamen and pistil, present in the flower. Now, the first stage is pollination. Pollination, the transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma of the flower, is called pollination, and this transfer can take place with the help of wind, water, or insects. These are called agents of pollination. Now, agents and the two types of pollination are self pollination and cross pollination. Self pollination. Self pollination, when the pollen grains are transferred from anther to the stigma of the same flower or other flower on the same plant. This is called self-pollination. And the cross-pollination, when the pollen grains are transferred from the anther to the stigma of the flower on another plant of the same kind. This is called cross pollination. These are the two types of pollination: self pollination and cross pollination. Now, what are the various agents of pollination? First, wind. Wind blows away the pollen grains from the anther of the one flower to the stigma of the another flower. And the features of the flower that are pollinated by wind are: these are small, not brightly colored, and do not produce nectar. And what are the features of pollen grains? Pollen grains are very light and produced in large numbers. Examples are wheat, rice, maize, all these are wind pollinated flower. Now this is wind pollination, and the next is water. Now, water pollinated. Water pollination takes place in aquatic plants, and pollen grains are released into the water, are carried out by water currents to the other flower. For example, seagrass and vallisneria. The next is after the water, then insects. Insects also play a very major role in the process of pollination. How do insects help in pollination? Now what happened? Insect visit the flower for nectar. Some pollen grains stick to the body parts of these insects, and when these insects visit another flower, the pollen grains fall on the stigma. This is how the insect help in the pollination. And what are the features of the flower? The insect pollinated flowers have sweet smell. They are brightly colored petals, and for example, rose, sunflower, they are rich in nectar. And what are the features of pollen grains? The pollen grains are sticky pollen grains, so that they can easily stick to the body of insect. In this way, insect pollination will take place. Now, the first very important process, that is fertilization. After the process of pollination, fertilization takes place. Now, fertilization is the process of fusion of male and female gamete. This is called fertilization. Now, in this process, what happened? As after the pollination, the stigma secrete the nutrients, and the pollen grains absorb these and start growing in the form of thin tube called pollen tube. Now, after landing on the stigma, the pollen grains produce the tube, and the tubes are called pollen tubes, and this tube carry male gamete. Only one pollen tube reaches the ovule in the ovary, and female gamete is present inside the ovule. And finally, the male gamete fuses with the female gamete, and then fertilization occurs. And after the fertilization, as a result of fertilization, the formation of zygote takes place. This is how the process of fertilization takes place. Now, the next is formation of fruit and seed. Now, after the fertilization, ovary enlarges and it changes into fruit. The wall of the ovary becomes fruit wall. The ovary then increased in size and becomes the fruit. The ovules changes, become seeds, changes into seeds. They become seeds, ovules that are present in the ovary. Now, fruit may have one or more seeds. Petals, sepals, and other parts of the flower dry up and fall off. This is how the fruit and seed formation takes place. Now, the fruit is the seed bearing part or the ripened ovary of the flowering plant. The fruit is the ripened ovary, and the seed is the ripened ovule, which contains an embryo and is covered by a protective coat. Now, what is germination? The process by which the embryo in the seed, the baby plant in the seed, becomes active and begins to grow into a new plant. This is called germination. Now, in this way, after the fertilization, the formation of seed and fruit take place. This is the ovary changes into fruit, ovary wall, fruit cover, and ovule that becomes seed. Now, the next important part of sexual reproduction is seed dispersal. Now, seed dispersal means that is the seeds and fruits of plants are dispersed away by wind, water, and animals, and the seeds show different characteristics depending on their dispersing agent. As we know, a plant produces many fruit, and if they were all to fall to the ground around the plant and then compete for light, water, minerals in the soil, then many of them would die. they will not able to compete as the due to the overcrowding. Now to prevent the overcrowding, then fruits and seed get dispersed, and plant use different method to achieve dispersal of seeds and fruits. Now what happened? Now dispersal agents are there. Now the first is the means of dispersal. First is by wind. Now seeds and fruit may be carried away by wind. It can be carried away by water and animals. Now the first is wind, and there are different characteristics of these seeds and fruits that carried away by wind. Now the first is the seeds are winged. They have small wings like structure. They are very light, and they are having the hair like structure. Now the hairy seeds like madar and the hairy fruit of sunflower, etc. Now the next is the water. These are water. These seeds or fruits normally develop the ability of floating in the form of fibrous or spongy or outer coat. Now, for example, very common example of the water dispersal is coconut. Now, coconut fruit is a good example in which the dispersal takes place by water. Coconut is grown on the seashore, and the fruit is large and fibrous. And now, being fibrous, spongy, after falling in water, the fruit floats in it, and the water currents carry the fruit away from the parent plant. Now this is how the dispersal of fruit and seeds takes place with the help of water. Next is the animal dispersal. How animals help in dispersal? Dispersal by animal is again common in such fruits and seeds which have spiny structure with hooks. Now what happened during this? Now these spiny seeds with hooks, they get stick to the bodies of the animals, and when the animals go to the different places, and these seeds and fruit get carried away to different places and then fall to the ground. For example, xanthium. And the few of the seeds disperse when the fruits burst out with a sudden jerk, which gets scattered away to a distance far from the parent plant. This is the how explosion of the fruit take place. And for example, balsam, castor, the seeds are dispersed when the fruit burst. This is how dispersal takes place. Now this is about all type of dispersal agent, animal dispersal, and wind dispersal, and the water dispersal. Now the next very important question, the very important part of this chapter: what is the difference between sexual and asexual reproduction? If we talk about the sexual reproduction, two parents are there, and in asexual reproduction, one parent only. Sexual reproduction: fusion of female and male gametes. In the asexual reproduction, no gametes are produced. Sexual reproduction: parent and offsprings are not identical. But in asexual reproduction, parent and offspring are identical. Now, the sexual reproduction is slower, but the asexual reproduction is faster as compared to sexual reproduction. And next is that during the sexual reproduction, where two parents are involved, the variation is present in the same species. But in asexual reproduction, there are no variations. These all are the differences of sexual and asexual reproduction. This is all about the chapter reproduction in plant. In this chapter, we have learned about the asexual reproduction like budding, fragmentation and spore formation. Then we have learned about the vegetative propagation, that the plant reproduce through vegetative part like root, stem and leaves. And then we have learned about the sexual reproduction that takes place with the help of two gamete, male gamete and female gamete. And in the sexual reproduction we have learned about the pollination, then fertilization, and then dispersal of fruits and seeds. Thank you.